I am a writer and sociologist and storyteller, and I have some simple answers for you about questions regarding social inequality. They're questions that come from people to me on the internet in all kinds of ways. And so if you have additional topics that you would like me to discuss in future episodes, then you can let me know in the chat box or by social media or email or however you want. So I just want to remind you, I don't have all the answers. I don't have the only right answers, but I'm going to spend a little time with you each week, up to an hour, doing what I can to address these kind of topics. Why? Because to my mind, it is hopeful if more people feel like they know enough to be able to join public discourse about things that influence our lives. And let's face it, a whole lot of things are happening in the world, in the United States as well. I'm going to focus on US policies related to one of our topics, no, both of our topics today. I'm also not here to offer you in-depth scholarship on these topics. In most cases, somebody else is more qualified to do that than I am. But look, sociologists have a particular view about the architecture of everyday life, and that's what I am here to talk to you about. So the topics that we are discussing today are sexual harassment in the workplace, and sex work stigma and laws in the United States. And I think we're going to start with sex work. So, as I often do, we're going to, back this conversation way up and talk about the meaning of human contact, the meaning of sexual contact in our culture. So check it out. There is like a nearly universal incest taboo, but then other than that, huge variations on how people understand sexual contact. The other salient feature, of course, in sexual contact is that it can be used to create people. This is a stunning reminder that in cultures where children are not communally raised, reproduction is a powerful way to subjugate certain individuals who are often known as women. And in our culture also, sex is normalized generally as monogamous and heterosexual and male dominated. Now, why am I saying that? You're going to see a little bit as we move on and talk about some of these laws related to sex work in the United States, that they're all about preserving male autonomy to have women available to them, sometimes people of other genders, but usually women available to them, and also to preserve the male gaze. So I'm going to discuss laws and stigma because this is a topic that emerged because of the Atlanta shootings recently, where mass murderer Robert Long chose massage parlors and a sexualized defense of his acts. And people are having a hard time discussing that, right? In fact, as soon as I saw the news, in the New York Times and the way they had framed these, this mass murder, and even talking about massage parlors as a social location, I thought, oh, we're about to have a big kind of kerfuffle public discourse about this, right? So I thought understanding laws and stigmas, because just handling sex work is way too big for our little bit of time that we have together here. But understanding laws and stigmas might help get folks into conversations about these crimes and the way that this killer has chosen to understand his actions, because it's salient to how a whole lot of folks understand their actions. So I am going to define sex work for this discussion as including stripping, certain types of massaging, as well as prostitution. There are a whole lot of ways to discuss this, but for right now, we're going to talk about this. So check it out. First of all, professions such as massage and modeling have long been sex work adjacent in the United States because of the power of touch and the power of the gaze. So think about this. If lingerie modeling seems like a weird thing to you, you may have seen signs for little businesses like off the freeway or industrialized areas that say lingerie modeling. And, I remember being, a very young person and seeing those signs and thinking, what are they modeling and who are they modeling it for, right? And then life goes on and you start to go, that's a sex thing. That's a sex thing that men go to, right? And the big reason that it's framed this way, lingerie modeling, is because we have really weird laws around sex work and around how this stuff can work. So, but check it out. We also all understand that there's a difference between a massage parlor and massage therapists. That also has to do with these weird laws and guidelines that we have around sex work. So consider the absurdity for a moment. Culturally, we have decided that sex requires regulation, but that touch is okay as long as it's therapeutic, and modeling is okay as long as it is in pursuit of product sales, right? Like if you're just arranging your own self for someone else's gaze because they like it, then we put that in a whole different category. So this is why I think it's useful to talk about sex work laws and stigma in the US, because what these laws and stigmas lead to is the protection of a non-universal idea of morality and a lack of protection for people. Right? So it's the protection of men's rights to access women's bodies for sexual purposes, and less so other bodies, but still that too. And that these laws vary by state, but also by city and by county. And this is why, a lot of people don't understand, like, why did I go to this one strip bar, but then across, and, there were these circumstances and rules, but then across town, there were different circumstances and rules. Well, it might have to do with different city or county ordinances that exist in these places. So let me just talk about those kind of laws and ordinances for just a moment. Again, protecting morality, not people. And I think it's important to continue to acknowledge that that is a non-universal view of morality that is being protected. Very much, we could talk for a long time about this, but very much rooted in the kind of Puritan ethic that that American colonialism was, brought forth. So here's the thing: laws vary, and the trifecta of leniency, though, with these laws has to do with whether or not full nudity is legal, whether or not a full liquor license is available to places where nudity is legal, and also full contact. That has to do with whether or not the lap dance is actually in your lap or 5 feet away from you, which, isn't a lap dance anymore, but still called that. So I want to just point out that, when we think about these three it's the trifecta of leniency with strip laws, West Virginia and Alaska are actually the only two, unless something has happened since I, have read about it in the interwebs, they're the only two states that have all three. So other states or cities or counties might have a combination of things that need to be covered. So sometimes they're, a little bit like there'll be a list of things that are like, well, okay, the areola has to be covered, the anal cleft has to be covered, the pubis has to be covered in a certain way, right? There will be these like bizarre minutia-based guidelines that all have to do with sex stigma in one way or another, and with that idea of upholding a certain type of morality. These kind of restrictions really create problems for people in the workplace, right? So for instance, in the workplace where the areola must be covered, that's painful, right? When you've got to be gluing something onto that one area of your body to do your job. Yeah. So I am leading you to think about these kind of laws and restrictions from the perspective of the workplace, because that's what it is, right? And if you think about the things that might be required of you, I mean, there are some heinous requirements for, you know, people who work in certain kinds of retail as well, right? Different outfits that you have to wear, a funny hat, I mean, who knows what else. But if we start to think of it in these terms, like what kind of outfit do you have to wear to do your job, these kind of stigmatizing laws become even more absurd than they already were. Okay, so all of this has to do with, if you don't follow the rules, your behavior is criminal, right? I mean, think about that. So, you know, there are certain strip clubs, for instance, where if there is a certain distance that a dancer has to remain from the patrons, or these lingerie modeling places where, you know, you get to be in the same room as the person who is disrobing, but you can't touch, or you can only touch in certain ways, or maybe a lap dance can have partial contact, which requires contortions from the person who's trying to keep one foot on the floor at all times. I mean, really interesting stuff when it comes down to it that are required here. So check it out. Creating patterns of criminalization for non-compliance to these kind of weird minutia laws criminalizes workers, right? It criminalizes workers' behavior that is often like has nothing to do with getting the job done. Now, if we thought about this in terms of getting the job done, you know, arousal, we might have a whole different outcome here. So here's the thing that I really want to talk about, though, is that when something is criminalized, there are barriers to safety for those workers. There are barriers to reporting abuse, because, you know, you're likely to be criminalized as well, rather than the person, you know, rather than being seen as the victim. There are barriers to forming networks with other businesses. There are barriers to forming networks with broader community. Also, criminalization targets people whom police believe look like sex workers. Trans women of color are particularly targeted in this category. So in the United States, Amnesty International, this study was a few years old, but not very old, maybe 2016, if I remember correctly, was saying that 40% of adults and 60% of youth who are arrested for prostitution are people of color, right? I mean, you know, that is a far greater number than their representation in the population. And so this kind of criminalization is really, really problematic in a number of levels. There also is the issue that people become vulnerable to law enforcement rather than being able to be served by law enforcement. So look, I mean, we all know that law enforcement has certain jobs to do and that they are required to do certain things. We also know that they fail at that sometimes, right? We've got Derek Chauvin on trial right now for the killing of George Floyd, and taking someone into custody in a peaceful way is certainly part of the job description. We also know that the job is not actually carried out in that way because of the broader culture that exists in law enforcement. So sex workers are another group that are criminalized in this kind of way. So it makes it more likely that abuse will take place in direct ways, like what I've been talking about, but also in peripheral ways, such as, for instance, how we perpetuate, I don't know, teenage girls, for instance, who are exploring their sexuality or exploring a certain aesthetic, and who just want to be seen as sexy, because of course, you know, women are supposed to ride this fine line to be recognized as validly performing their genders, to be sexy but not slutty. And this whole upholding of the concept of slutty is related to how culturally we treat sex workers and sex work adjacent kind of jobs. All right. It also, and this is the last thing I'm going to talk about before I see if there's anything you all need to say about this. These laws and stigma also make it very difficult to have regular conversations about workplace safety. And there are models in the United States, right? New Zealand has recently decriminalized sex work. Parts of Australia have legalized brothel work. In a very different way than Nevada has, by the way. I haven't mentioned this, but Nevada is the only state in which certain counties allow prostitution. But again, the laws are made to protect morality rather than protect workers. So, people often refer to working in those kind of brothels in Nevada as being, like you're at summer camp or in a women's prison, one or the other, because you cannot leave. Once you are in that workplace, you are 24/7 in that house during the time that you are working. And that has to do, again, protection of morality rather than protection of people. All right, I do just want to say, I'm going to plug in my headphones here because there's wind and rain coming here. So one of the things that people always want to talk about in this conversation is trafficking. Let me just say why I've not talked about this. And a lot of the laws in the United States are supposed to be protecting people from trafficking. Let me just say this: trafficking is slavery. And if we can focus on that, it becomes less needed to wade through the meanings of sex work when we prosecute slavery. So there we go. So much more to say, but that's a little bit on laws and stigma in the United States, the kind of things that made it easier for that Atlanta mass murderer to shift blame onto women for tempting him to do something immoral, right? To express his sexuality in a way that he considered immoral. And obviously that is an absurd thing to say, but so deeply embedded in American consciousness that we have to be able to have public discourse about this. Emily is going to share a article with you on vox.com. It's short and it talks about sex work decriminalization. And if you want to know more, which I think you should, about sex work from the perspective of sex workers, I'm sorry, Emily, I didn't give you this one ahead of time, but it's nswp.org is an international organization. And, you can look at news and interesting things from around the world at nswp.org. Maybe you can put that in the chat as well.
Did you say NSWP?
Correct.
You got it. Oh, look at that.
Hey.
The transcription caught that. Okay.
Oh, the transcription caught that. I'm so exciting. So exciting. This is the first time I've used Zoom with transcription. So, does anyone have questions or comments? I know I just said a lot of things that, sometimes don't seem totally related to each other, but I can help maybe if that was the case.
Folks, you can unmute yourselves and I will. Yeah, I guess if you don't have video, I see Samantha. Just start talking. We can hear you.
Okay. What do you mean exactly by criminalization? So they make them look bad, is what you're saying?
Criminalization means that somebody can actually arrest you for doing that thing. And, in the United States, those arrests are either misdemeanors or felonies. So a misdemeanor arrest generally carries a fine or jail time or both. A felony arrest can really mess you up. A felony arrest can carry fines, jail time, and also bar you from certain types of labor in the future. So for instance, the state of Louisiana has felony sex work charges, and they also require sex workers to register as sex offenders after those felony charges are carried forth, which is astonishing, right? The idea that having someone pay you for sexual activity can make you into a sex criminal. And, those kind of registering as a sex criminal means that you can't have a whole list of jobs. You can't live among people usually anymore. I mean, it's a real problem. Is
So
that helpful?
yeah, so like the workplace wouldn't get in trouble, but the people that work there would.
So if it is a strip bar, for instance, or a lingerie modeling that we're talking about, it is possible for the business to also be fined for the, like, let's say, for instance, a lap dance has to be done 5 feet from the customer, but she's closer. Uh, Both the business and the worker can be criminally charged for that. So there is an incentive, right, for businesses to try to get employees to play by the rules. But a lot of those rules, again, they protect morality rather than protecting workers. So, for instance, massage parlors, lingerie modeling, often there is a rule that you can't have any locked doors in those places. Well, what does that mean? I mean, are you safer sometimes with a locked door? Sometimes you are, and that is a situation that should be decided by the people working there.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Phyllis, did you have a question?
No, actually, it's a very interesting thing because as you were talking about the trifecta, I was thinking about the profession I went into. When I was in school, they let us know that originally only prostitutes had done this work, and eventually nuns did this work. We, let's see, we had to wear a particular outfit that made sure that our nipples didn't show, always had pantyhose, that everything would be well covered, little hat to show that we were, not to be touched. Always the work included drugs. I had a license to touch. I was a registered nurse. And as a young registered nurse, the very first time I worked a night shift and had to give somebody a back rub before their surgery the next day, I was immediately offered, well, what are you doing after work tonight? It's like, I'm going home to my husband. And as soon as I complained that, male patients were coming on to me merely for the fact that I was working at night and touching them, I was told, well, what did you do to bring that on?
Yeah.
And so it was like, okay, one more lab coat, got a real short little butchy haircut, and which really suited me. But anyway, so originally when I came on here, I was going to talk about the sex workers I had actually worked with as a psychiatric nurse and as a community health nurse. And all of a sudden I realized, wait a minute, I actually had to go through this too. And it took a long time to learn. Hey, you can't tell administration if men are taking it the wrong way because they figure that you have done something wrong, particularly in a Catholic hospital,
So Phyllis, I am so glad that you brought up this aspect of your experience. And this is part of the reason that we're talking about the second topic that we're talking about today is sexual harassment in the workplace, because sex work stigma creates an environment of hostility toward all women in the workplace that is related to, so when you're describing the kinds of uniform you had to wear as a nurse that also would diminish the appearance of sexual impropriety with patients, these things are related to the stigma that sex work receives in the culture. And the idea that touch, any kind of touch between a woman and a man, and also the time of day, as you mentioned, right? What's happening here is that we have encoded certain types of experience into male-female interactions.
Yeah.
And they are inherently interactions that subjugate women, right? Subjugate, I'll say it a different way, subjugate non-male bodies. And this is, this is a real issue. And I understand that there are a few leaps that you have to make. I'm trying to hold your hand as you leap over from one topic to another here, but they are definitely related. Thank you, Phyllis. Does anybody else have questions or comments? Because I do want to go on to our second topic for the day.
I don't see anyone else's mic open.
Feel free to open your mic.
Seems like everyone's ready for us to
All
move
right,
on.
duckies. All right, duckies. Let's see what we can talk about now. And please let us. I want to share another article with you, actually, which on its surface is going to look like it is not related to this. Emily, this is the one from the New Yorker about how polyamorists and polygamists are changing family norms in America. This is related to the conversation that we're having because of definitions of sexuality and how certain ones are protected by law and also privileged by privileged, period, right? Whether it's by tax breaks or whether it's by ability to care for loved ones, whereas certain family norms are not so privileged and sometimes even criminalized in the case of polygamy, for instance. So this actually is related, and this is a lovely article from the New Yorker that looks at the spectrum between polygamy and polyamory and how folks are understanding the creation of family in relationship to the state in the US. So again, still focused on laws and stigma in this conversation. And so that article might be of interest to you too. Okie dokie. Sexual harassment in the workplace. Again, there is so much more to say than what I'm going to say, but hopefully I'm going to say enough that allows you to get into public discourse about these topics. So there are laws against sexual harassment in the workplace. Let me just review for you quickly what that looks like. There's two types of laws. One is called quid pro quo. If you do this, then I will do that, right? It is asking for sexual favors in in exchange for keeping a job, being promoted in a job, getting a job. Quid pro quo sexual harassment. This is the easiest one to prosecute if somebody heard the boss say, well, if you have sex with me, you can have this promotion. Now, obviously, that is not the most typical situation. So the other type of prosecutable sexual harassment in the US is called hostile environment. So hostile environment is much harder to prove, as you might imagine. So let me just say, here are a few things about the burden of proof. Here are a few things, right? So first of all, the victim, as well as the harasser, may be people of any gender. The victim does not have to be a different sex or gender from the harasser. The harasser may be the victim's supervisor, an agent of the employer, a supervisor in another area, a coworker, a non-employee, such as, like a vendor or customer, like this is the sort of thing where people say like, oh, well, so-and-so is coming from this other company that, handles our so-and-so, and I want you to be really nice to him, wink, wink, that sort of thing. Yeah. Also, the victim does not have to be the person harassed, but could be anyone affected by the offensive conduct. Also, unlawful sexual harassment may occur without economic injury or discharge to the victim. So what that means is it might be harassment, even if it does not cause you to lose your job, do poorly at your job, any of those other things. And this kind of goes without saying, but the harasser's conduct must be unwelcome. It must be unwelcome. So there might be something that, could be seen as harassment in another context, but if it is not unwelcome, then it doesn't fall into this category. So here's the thing about these, the way these laws work. Here's the thing. Look, I'm about to get comfortable here. Here's the thing is we all know that the rules are the rules, but when you walk into a workplace, if you are a person with a marginalized identity, let me give you a few here: female, queer, person of color, disabled. If you are a person with a marginalized identity, what is the first thing you do when you start a new job? You try and figure out, what is the culture here in this place regarding folks like me? So we all know this. And we also know that sexual harassment is still acceptable and rampant, despite the fact that there are laws to prevent it. So part of the deal is understanding those circumstances under which something prosecutable can happen. But also, over here, the idea is to figure out, how do you improve the culture of the workplace, given that every workplace exists within a broader culture that is so excited about gender inequality, it can barely keep its pants on, right? Like, this is the broader culture in which we live, where gender inequality, and we can say all of these other inequalities as well, are the norm. So it's not a foregone conclusion just because there's a law against something that it's going to be something we don't see. Now, we're seeing right now, for instance, what's his name? I keep getting his name wrong. Getz, Congress person from Florida, who is being investigated. It's like there was just this cascade of things that suddenly he is being investigated for, many of which seem to have happened like in his work in Congress. And all of a sudden, then there are a bunch of people talking about, well, but Congress has always been kind of like, everybody knows that women are exploited and abused in those situations. Okay, now we're down to something, right? We're down to something that we actually need to talk about and handle, is the culture of the workplace. Same thing with the culture of the workplace regarding policing that I just mentioned a little while ago. So here are some things. I mean, some of this might sound obvious, but I think that it's worth commenting on. Some things that might be helpful in the workplace, if they don't already exist. A way to clarify expectations, a way to involve leadership or management in a supportive role if there is a perception, or even the perception, but the reality certainly, of sexual harassment. Also, that precautions are taken, and precautions, this is tricky, right? Because think again about the conversation about criminalization that we just had. Precautions need to be non-punitive for those who might be being harassed, right? Education and training, also monitoring, a clear complaint system, a way to support victims and resolve incidents, hopefully using a transformative justice model when possible. So a transformative justice model, for those who don't know, is one that takes into account that people have human relationships that often can be maintained as long as people come back into connection with respectful behavior and an acknowledgement of one another's humanity. The road to that is sometimes a short path and sometimes miles long. And so that form of conflict resolution sometimes requires a person to be let go from their job but is a different focus than simply punishment. So these are some of the things that, I think that we need to be discussing, or at least understanding when we have discussions. But the basis of all of these discussions has to come back to marginalized people and their understanding of workplace culture, right? Regarding their own identities, right? Is the workplace hostile to women? Is it have a hostile environment, or quid pro quo, or marginalization? Like for instance, I mean, the classic one, of course, is in any business or law environment where strip clubs that is male dominated, where strip clubs are like the normal place you take clients. And what is the marginalization of women who work in sales or in those kind of industries? Or we could go outside of gender with this, right? Like, does the workplace tolerate microaggressions toward people of color? Does promotions of people of color and respect for the physical and intellectual labor of people of color, is there respect there? We could think about this in terms of size and weight stigma as well, right? Are there slurs tolerated against fat or disabled people? Are there health challenges in the workplace, or mandatory exercise programs, or events where non-normative bodies can be called out? These are things that have to be taken seriously and challenged specifically in order to get at this issue of like, oh, but we have a policy. Yeah, but what do you do with it? What do you do with the policy? Becomes this question when we talk about sexual harassment. Oh, there's so much more to say, but let me pause there and see if you all have other things that you might like to discuss. Oh, and Emily can also give you a link for information on workplace sexual harassment policies in the
Got it.
US.
Yep. So you're free to unmute yourselves and chime in, everyone. And here's the link. I don't see
I
any.
know how. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
I didn't really have a question, but like I wanted to make a comment. Like when you're talking about culture in the workplace, like it makes me really mad that in workplaces that there's like younger people, like 20s, that they think it's okay to like do certain things. Like my friend worked, she had like a fast food place, and she like told her manager that she was being harassed like by a couple of guys at her work, and like he didn't care, so she ended up quitting. And like I know a lot of my friends had like that situation has happened, that they'll tell their manager, or even their manager will be like the one harassing them, and like no one does anything about it. And I think that's like something that we need to change in our culture, because it became so normalized. Like people think it's okay to do that.
Samantha, I'm so glad that you brought this up, because age is definitely another vector of potential inequality in the workplace, right? And I think you're right that it's possible for a 20-year-old woman to not be taken as seriously as a 40-year-old woman might be. It's also possible that in a workplace with that type of culture, neither woman would be taken seriously. And there's another, since you mentioned that this was, did you say it was fast food?
Yeah.
Yeah. Since you mentioned that, that is also one of the professions, and I want to say one of many professions, where minimum wage laborers are seen as utterly disposable. And so the effort to change a workplace culture might seem simply not worth it, especially to those who are victimizing others, because there is this endless cycle of endless supply of workers to fill those fill those positions. It makes for an extremely vulnerable work situation. And we see, you know, just, I mean, like the tiniest minute bit of progress. Periodically, there will be like a giant lawsuit. McDonald's was the last one that I recall, but you know, Burger King has had one. These kind of workplaces where finally there will be a class action lawsuit where multiple women will come forth with you know, these claims, and then that will get some attention. But you're absolutely right; it's extremely difficult in minimum wage labor for change to occur.
Yeah, and it's kind of like, how do you change that culture? But it's like how you said, it's been going on for a long time like that.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't really think of anything to do to change how they are.
So look, I do want to mention that there is, as hopeless as it feels sometimes in these kind of situations, it is possible for individuals to create cultural change in the workplace when they are aware. So for instance, since we're talking about the fast food work environment, one of the potentially positive things about the fast food work environment is that individuals promote to management very quickly. And that can be terrible, right? If it's a person who really doesn't care about workplace culture. But it also means that, you know, it is possible for a manager who is not part of the bigger overall corporate culture to have an effect on how people treat one another during their shifts. And so, you know, I think that we shouldn't think about these things as utterly hopeless. If more people are aware of how they can influence workplace culture from whichever standpoint they are in, that's all the better. Anybody else have questions or comments? And please comment on either topic or the relationship between the two if you want to.
Hi, I had a comment or a question regarding both topics a little bit, and similar to the question that was just raised. I guess, how do we decipher what is worth fighting? Because I feel like a lot of times as women, this is something, unfortunately, a fight can be really drawn out on almost any comment that's made towards a female. But how do we not let a culture of microaggressions continue if it's not just an outright harassment? So it's just unfortunately a culture of disliking women, if that makes sense.
Oh, it makes sense. Thank you, Desiree. It makes sense. So let me offer this. Part of what we are discussing is how to manage cultural change in the workplace. But part of what we're talking about, and I feel like I want to say this about every topic I have ever discussed on the Hope Desk, is part of what we are talking about is how to manage our own personal sovereignty in everyday life about the behavior that we will tolerate, the behavior that we are willing to stand by and watch, the behavior that we are going to enact on others, that there is the question of personal sovereignty is always in play, right? And you're absolutely right. There are, you know, when you're confronted with 100 microaggressions in a day, which ones do you choose to make an issue of? Which ones do you know, how do you navigate that? That's going to vary from person to person, but becoming the kind of person who is known to not accept degrading behavior of others or of oneself is an important step. How do you do that? Sometimes by opting out of certain conversations. Sometimes dissent is not confrontational. It is simply non-participatory. So for instance, let's say somebody tells a sexist joke at work. And what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to laugh. I mean, let's say it's the boss even that's telling the sexist joke. You're supposed to laugh. You're supposed to show that I'm not hurt by those things, even though you're talking about bodies like mine, lives like mine, whatever the thing happens to be. You don't have to make a huge deal of that in the moment that it happens. You don't have to file a report, although, depending on the joke, you might. But it is possible to say, first of all, to not laugh and to just say, I don't find that sort of thing funny, and turn around and go back to your desk. That is still an act of personal sovereignty, right? And what's going to happen as a result? Yeah, it's possible that somebody's going to say, you don't have a sense of humor, or you don't know how to take a joke, or they're going to just think of you as no fun. Well, look, that's possible, but it's also possible that someone is going to think next time they say something like that in public at work. And that is actually what we want. That's the like tiny wedge in the door that holds the door open for people considering harassment in the workplace differently. It is the tiny wedge that allows for people to have that conversation. And then what you hope for is that other people will say, I think she's got a fine sense of humor. She just didn't like that. Or that was messed up when you said that. It's like there is a wedge then where different change can happen. So we can't ignore our personal sovereignty to be as much of who we can in public at a time. And that's going to vary. You're going to make choices based on the situation, based on what you have to lose. You're going to make choices. But where possible, if something needs resistance, offer it. I hope that's helpful.
Yes, very.
Anything else about either topic before I ask you the question I always ask you?
Phyllis?
One thing.
Yes, Phyllis.
So it is about the sovereignty, and I did want to talk about this, about the sex workers, because I was working in New Orleans, okay? And one of the things I've seen is women are either criminalized or they're put into the mental health system as soon as it's decided that they are now a prostitute, no longer a mistress, or they've ended up being arrested for prostitution because they were with someone who was of a higher echelon than they were. It's like, put them away, drug them. And it's sad. And again, most of the women I worked with were Black. I had a couple of white females, but for the most part, it was women who got kicked to the curb and were in a situation where males controlled them. Their sovereignty was totally taken away. And I don't know how to decriminalize other than to keep letting women know that what they do with their bodies is their choice and their right, and it's not about morality.
That's right, Phyllis. But look, we're in a different conversation regarding decriminalization of sex work in the US than we have ever been in before. Two of the Democratic presidential candidates in the last election cycle, and Kamala Harris actually is in favor of, a lot of types of decriminalization, not across the board, but we are in a different political conversation, and we need more folks that continue to frame these issues as related to workplace safety. Rather than related to protecting a non universal morality idea.
Yes.
I want to comment on one other thing that you said, Phyllis, and that is you also added in to this discussion, which is great, the medicalization of sex worker motivation. And that is something that I don't know what time period you were doing this work? I'm guessing it was a while back.
Um, all the way into the 200s, 2000s.
Wow, not as far back as I would hope. Okay,
Yeah,
but
I was doing
still,
psychiatric nursing from somewhere in the 1980s to
yeah.
till 2007, actually. But actually, the work with actually specifically working with women who had had either sexual trauma, sexual compulsion,
Mhm.
or prostitution was back up until 2005.
Okay, so I want to say there has been progress on this front, the
Mhm.
medicalization front. Not enough, of course, with regard to ensuring people's personal sovereignty in the workplace. But yeah, we need to keep at these things. You know, it's an issue in social inequality. So let me just ask you before we go today, does anyone have any idea about where they might discuss these topics again? And that can be anything from your workplace to school to your dinner table to with a friend over coffee. Do you see any way that you might use some of what we have discussed today as fodder for your future conversations? If you can think of anything, I would love to know it.
Hmm.
Well, for me, it helps with like my future job and then also my friends' like jobs because I mean, my goal is to be a special ed high school teacher, but I'm not there yet, you know. I still have to get my credentials, so in the meantime, I still have to work. But now I'm considering like maybe I shouldn't work in a fast food place because that's where like most of the sexual harassment happens. Like maybe I should find a different job somewhere and then with my friends that are like dealing with issues with work, I would also like maybe have conversations with them and encourage them, you know, maybe that's not the best workplace for you and think about like their cultures and what job they can go to that wouldn't feel that way.
Samantha, that's great to keep having these conversations in all of these places. I want to clarify, just because I was using fast food as an example, though, it is not unique among low-paid labor. So I'm sorry to say, you're gonna run across these things in other forms of lower paid labor as well, and maybe higher paid labor as well.
Mm-hmm.
But those are wonderful things. Thank you, Samantha, for those examples. Anybody else have a thought about where you might next discuss these things?
Well, I'm a sociology major, so I'm finishing up. I'll be graduating this semester, so it's definitely present in almost all of the classes that I'm taking right now. But I also am a leader for our church group for young adults, and I have a group of girls who are sophomores, and as obviously probably sex conversations or sex work conversations aren't going to come up in that, but I think a lot of these things they have to be discussed with young females and kind of destigmatizing conversations of uncomfortable conversations because they're unfortunately going to deal with it regardless of age.
Beautiful. I love the idea of you bringing your sociologist self to your church group discussions about sex and stigma. And also, remember one of the things that I talked about regarding how the criminalization of sex work influences young people has to do with, I mean, not, even girls who are not considering sex work are still influenced by the stigma that tells them they have to project a certain type of sexualized appearance in order to be valid as women. And yet there is that, razor's edge to be walked regarding acceptability. So these things are related even to how, any young women are seeing their personal expressions of self and sexuality. Thank you, Desiree. Anybody else?
Talk about it every chance that you have, that you
Beautiful.
feel that will make a difference.
Thank you, Phyllis. Talk about social inequality every chance you have that you feel will make a difference. And that's probably a good place to end. And you can find me online. If you miss me between now and next month's Hope Desk, you can find me online. And thank you, Emily, as usual, for your help with this. And this is always free, always available to everyone. So let someone know if you want to. And some of the past episodes are on YouTube. I'll see y'all later.